All right. Okay, the next person up is Prasanta. Yeah.
Hello.
If you got, all right, perfect. So if you can get your slides up,
Hold on, I'm trying to.
no
If,
problem. Okay, something is, camera's up.
yeah.
Yep.
All right. Let me try and share.
Yep. Give it a second because finding the clicking this
Yeah.
thing is harder than it looks because
Yeah.
always with the UI. Okay, I am
Can you
seeing.
see?
Okay, I see your slides. I'm going to shut up now. It's all yours.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Prashanto. I'm joining from London. And today we're going to talk about my experience working on the COVID-19 tracker. So, I'm an information designer, a web developer, and a data journalist. I've been working with Reuters since 2019, um, and I have covered a lot of the crazy stuff that has been going around, including, of course, the pandemic, the wars and conflicts, and even Eurovision, if you're familiar with it. So yes. Glimpse of some of my works. Uh, but today we are going to talk about, of course, the COVID-19 tracker. So back in 2020, when the pandemic started, um, eventually we ended up building a platform, a dashboard, which was more less dashboardy and more newsy in terms of the presentation, which provided information for more than like 240 countries, and it ran for almost until the end, and garnered almost more than 100,000 page views weekly, and yeah, and it was widely quoted in other news reports and etc. etc. So this is a glimpse of that, like some of the charts and stuff that was there. But this is not how it always looked. So this was how it began. So when the outbreak started, a bunch of people in Asia started collecting those numbers because it was quite local. But so one of the reasons we started collecting the data ourselves was because it helped us to be on top of things in terms of the reporting accuracy and also the speed, because of course that matters in terms of news. So yeah, this was the initial version, but at some point it and so of course, like when we started, like it was just a Google sheet, a bunch of reporters in India and some other places. But quickly things got out of hand, and even before we realized, it had turned into a pandemic. And that's exactly when we started working on something that was much, much bigger and involved reporting on the entire world. Uh, so the project was conceptualized somewhere around mid-June 2020, and there were three people who were working on the design and development of it. Um, and Of course, the data team, it was quite huge. Towards the end, a lot of people working around the clock to collect numbers of as countries report. It took almost like 2.5 months for us to build the entire thing and publish it on in September 2020. The way we had structured it, there was the global page, as you can see, where we had stats about international relevant figures, charts and maps. Then we had pages by region, for Asia, Africa, Europe, the Americas. And then we had granular pages for every country where we reported the important stats, but at the same time, we had some more localized information. So what you see here is some stats on a global level. Of course, there had to be a map. And then on regional pages, we had more of a regional cut of the data. And then on local pages, some on country level pages, what we had was uh, apart from the usual stats, we had some extra metrics. For example, the one that you see currently is a comparison of how the country is doing in terms of its cases, its numbers compared to other places in the region and globally. So this was quite a big deal around that point, like the comparison point. So this was one of the metrics we put. Later on, when vaccination started, we had started another section to our tracker that tracked, vaccination rates, which were reported. And then one of the other things that we did, the another ambitious thing I must say, is Reuters started collecting its own data set about when vaccinations are being available in different countries, and which groups are being eligible and all that stuff. Now that information was uh, available on a country level, but it was very hard to you know find one place that has all that information. So the writers did that bit of work collecting all that data, and then it took us some work to normalize all of that into a dashboard where we could have it in a data form that could be fed into a dashboard in the first place. So yeah, this was the tracker. So what do you think the data pipeline for something like this looked? So, no surprises. Yes, the entire thing still stood strong on top of Google Sheets. So just because we started collecting the data in a Google Sheet in the beginning, there was really no time to like change things, and also we had to work with different people, and of course Google Sheets is one of the most convenient ways to enter data. So we stuck with it, and at the same time we didn't realize like how massive it's gonna get. So anyway, but that's we got stuck with Google Sheets, and Google Sheets got stuck with us. Towards the end of the project, I remember we almost were worried that we would run out of the columns in the sheet, because there is a limit, obviously, to spreadsheets. Um, but yeah, we did not, and things worked out pretty fine. So one of the things that we did to make this work was, as you can see, there's this publish button. So every time somebody would update the data, they would hit the publish button, which would trigger a workflow on AWS, and then this data would go and would be reformatted into multiple different data files, which would live on the server, and those would be fed into the tracker. As you can see, there's a column for every date. There's all these regions and the countries. Yeah. So this is the data for the vaccine rollout tracker. So when we started collecting the data for the vaccines, again, just because the Google Sheets workflow was working fine for us, we kind of stuck with it. But since we knew what we are getting into, we could be a bit more structured about how we approach this. So talking about normalizing the data. So once we had substantial amount of data, probably a couple of weeks, or maybe even a month, we kind of formalized how we are categorizing the information, what are the age groups, because there would be some countries would report vaccine priority groups as less than 15, whereas some countries would put that cutoff at 18. There would be another cutoff at 45 or something. So it took us some effort to find out like the sweet spot of that binning and the categorization, so that all these data set could be put into one structured format. So yeah, that's the data bit. Now, the other part that feeds into the tracker is obviously a CMS system, a content management system, right? Like how all of this, because a lot of this has to be, dynamic, constantly updating numbers. The tracker would probably update almost 4 to 5 times in a day. The frequency dependent on like, what a time of the pandemic it was. But yeah, on an average, something like that. So Our CMS was also pretty interesting. We, at that point, we used to have a system built on top of Google Docs and a markup language called HTML. It's a pretty common thing in across newsrooms. But yeah, it basically takes a Google Sheet and then converts it into a JSON, a data format that you can plug into a web page. So yeah, that was our content system. Um, Now, one of the interesting things that we had on the tracker was once you start, you would get a lot of headlines that would show up what's the most relevant thing. So as I said, like besides being a dashboard, it was also shaped in the form of a newsletter so that it stays relevant to, people visiting every day or even on the same day and different times of the day. So now, this was before, AI at our fingertips. So what we ended up doing, also there was we built an internal tool for the same, where you could have all these stats that were made available to the reporters internally so that they could pick those up and either dive deeper into a country stat or just use those stats in their reporting. Even this thing was built in a Google Sheet, in a Google Doc. So we would calculate what are the most important statistics. So, for example, the maximum cases, the most recent trends, or milestones for every country, and maybe global milestones. And then we built a custom algorithm that would weigh each of those and find out which ones are most important. So, for example, a global milestone, right, 5 million cases would be a higher priority than a country level stat. Whereas a country which had not had a lot of cases for quite a long time, but suddenly sees a huge uptick is again a headline stat. So yeah, we built a custom algorithm that would use these stats and formulate headlines and then come up with a smart way to display them on the tracker. Um, yeah. Now, this was the main data set, but at the same time, there were other things that were also on the tracker. So, for example, this one that you see is measuring lockdown. So, the Oxford University had started putting out a data set called the Oxford Stringency Index, which would show how different measures have been implemented across countries and how well they are performing or not. So, this is the data that we kind of showed using this plot. And this is what the data collection looked like. So there was a file for every country and this and by regions, and then this would get updated almost every day, except for the weekends, I guess. So, and that brings me to this part that there were numerous data sets that were constantly running based on automated workflows that were collecting data, reformatting and reshaping data as we would need for reporting, and then those were made available to us. So there were, these data sets. There later on we also we're collecting data about local stuff like oxygen availability in hospitals in India, or um, or vaccinations by in the different parts of US, which were more localized, and then we would either put them on the tracker or put out different stories for that. So and these data collection pipelines kind of helped us do a lot of stories which we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So this is from India's story where during the second wave there was really a scarcity of oxygen, and then we kind of put together the story, measuring what's the availability in different hospitals and so on and so forth. Uh, then there's this another story when vaccinations opened up in India. There were for the 18 to 45 group, there was really a scarcity of vaccines, and people were scrambling to for appointments and stuff. So this was an important story where the data was pretty messy, because there was this government portal that used to put out availability of appointments, and they were extremely hard to get to. So you would have to log in at a particular time of the day, and then within half an hour you would see everything booked out. Um and that it was kind of the crux of this story, where so I had built this scraper that would go and see whenever these vaccination slots would be made available. So there's this tracker that I used to run locally at sometime in the evening to fetch these numbers before it shows they have run out. And over time I collected it for almost a couple of weeks. um, and then the entire data set, I remember it was just a text file of almost like 200 megabytes. uh, and it was just a crazy system, because as halfway through the collection, I remember there was they changed the data structure, they changed some of the fields, which meant like I couldn't only use probably a week's worth of data in the end for making the chart that you see on the right here. Uh, so yeah, a lot of the things had to be done on the go based on how the data reporting is happening, and so on. Um, yeah, just to add at this point, like a lot of these scrapers were built using JavaScript based on top of Node.js, and they used to run using GitHub Actions. So that was the kind of pipeline we had used. It was a pretty neat way of doing things for the most part. Now, scrapers were not the only thing that kind of something that we had to write to make the tracker work. Uh, there were a lot of other side quests. So one of them being we had to, just because there are different ways the countries are named, and we had to normalize how all of them work across data sets. So we kind of built our own geography library that had all the country ISO codes, all the country names based on how Reuters guidelines say we are supposed to, say, report the names of countries and other stuff. So yeah, that process also helped us come up with different internal tools for our workflows. So at the end of it, realized there are a couple of major takeaways, and working on the data part of this project helped me do a lot of good data work on for some other stories as well. So some of the key takeaways are like data is messy, but if you define your own systems to clean, categorize, and communicate your data, you will probably be in a good place. The other part of it is that when the data structure can change at the source. For example, I remember um, in one of the vaccination reporting, the a new gender column was added at some point, and that kind of threw the numbers away. So, but we had a good data validation scheme in place, so that kind of saved us. So that's the other part. Like whenever you're building data systems, make sure you have a good data validation mechanism in place as well, so that when things change, your things don't necessarily break. Data is messy, but you can build things even with simple tools more often than you cannot, as long as you have a good workflow. Like we built this entire thing, gigantic thing that out of Google Docs and Google Sheets, and survived. If we had to do it another time, maybe we'll do it better, but well, you never know. Data is messy, but you should always document your data pipeline, so when something breaks, things still make sense, if not just to you, but to other people working on a project, and you can potentially debug or reproduce things. Data is messy, So you should always keep backups of your raw data. Like I cannot tell how many times I have thanked myself and patted myself on the back that, oh my God, I have these raw files. So the COVID vaccination project for India that I was talking about, when things changed on their end, I was really glad that I had backups of some of the old reports, which I could then manually plug into my data set and then still have an entire data set and not abandon the project midway. So yeah, also this helps because when you're dealing with data sources which are as massive as, government reporting, things may change even uh, without even an explanation, right? And it may not necessarily make sense, and maybe that itself becomes the point of a story, right? So being able to track those changes and hold the data accountable goes a long way as well. And that brings me to the last part where data is messy, so you should, when you're using it, especially in a journalistic scenario, or even otherwise, like you should definitely be clear and transparent about your decisions and judgments about how you have handled your data and any nuances that could impact its interpretation. So case in point with COVID data, again, there were some countries that would report negative deaths data on some point. There would be these random data corrections. There would be these random data dumps after a weekend, or some adjustments after a couple of months, which clearly were, again, red flags in the data. But of course, you have to stay true to your source. But what you can potentially do is be transparent about it and tell your readers that, by the way, this is what has happened. So even though the chart shows a spike, that spike may not necessarily mean that, there have been a lot of deaths over the weekend. It could just be a data adjustment. And those little things make that helps translate those numbers, that data into, reliable information. So yeah, to end, I'd just go over some of the tools that we use, pretty simple stuff. So, of course, Google Sheet was our data entry point. We used LowDB on some of the projects, which is a very simple JSON-based database system. There's something called Zord, which is a data validation library. API is a full stack platform for web scraping. We did not use this a lot, but in this one, but in some projects I have, and all of this lived and ran through GitHub Actions, which helps with automating your workflows and in a massive way. Here's the links to the stories that I can put in the chat if you want, that I've shown. And lastly, if you can want to get in touch, here's a link to my profile. And on that note, I'll end. And questions, thoughts.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, there are a lot of questions. Don't have enough time for all of them probably, but I'll try to get through as many as we can.
Okay.
So the first one is, what tools were you using to put together these graphs that you were showing, because they look so pretty?
Okay, so the ones on the tracker are built using D3. So again, it's a web page, so everything is front end. So D3 is a library to draw with data, draw SVGs and charts. So so yeah, that was what we used for making the interactive charts. For some of the other stories where the charts are like static, they were built using maybe D3 or some tools like Data Wrapper, and then styled using Adobe Illustrator or anything that lets you edit an SVG and then put it as a static on the page.
Cool. All right, another quick question is, did Google Sheet typos cause any downtime for you?
Uh, so we did have like proper validation even within Sheets. So there would be like, if you misspell a country, it would be. So we kind of tried to reduce things that needs to be entered again and again, so that there is no issue with stuff like that. But again, data validation would have helped. So like, I could talk about another project where we ran into such issues. That a same sheet was handled by lots of different people, but we would have this anytime somebody entered some data that where there was a typo, it would flag that, okay, I cannot update the tracker because there is this error on this line. And then it flags the reporter, and the reporter can go and change. Oh, I didn't see what's happening. There's two entries for this thing which doesn't work. So yes.
Cool. All right. There's a couple of questions that we probably can't get to because we're at time, but thank you so much for your chat. A lot of people were kind of groaning at the fact that you had to deal with this fast changing environment of like where everyone's just like throwing new data up and the things are changing as you speak. So a lot of people are just, yeah, felt that pain. So thank you so much.